This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. This week, in the last programme of the series, The Most Powerful Person in Radio 4, its boss, Gwyneth Williams, is in the feedback hot seat to take questions directly from listeners. Ambridge, the 12 o'clock schedule changes, and the allegedly dazzling digital future of Radio 4 will all get an airing, along with other issues you've raised with us in this series. And we'll be asking the controller whether the ongoing budget cuts mean epics like this will soon become a thing of the past.
Oh, the wound isn't on my face, it's here in my heart. Andre, my boy, stop them!
A tantalising taste of the 10-hour adaptation of War and Peace, which is taking up pretty much all of the schedule on New Year's Day, and which should be consumed with a glass of vodka, says the controller. Is that what you will be drinking?
I certainly will. I'll be there with my blinnies and vodka.
But how long? I mean, 10 hours. Do you expect anybody to listen all the way through?
This is the most brilliant book ever written. It's not a conventional novel. People can dip in and out of it, and they will get an enormous amount from almost anything they hear of it.
Well, we'll be talking budgets and epic drama in more detail in a moment, but first there's no doubt which programme has dominated the feedback inbox over the past 12 weeks. The Archers. Listener Ken Oliver sent us that version of the Archers theme tune. Ken, does that sum up your view of the current direction of the Archers? It's morphing into EastEnders.
Absolutely, Roger. I've been a listener for 40 years or so, and of course we've seen many dramatic twists and turns in the plot over that time, but there just seems to be an urge under the new editor to shock us, and I think that music sums it all up, really.
And so what's the question you'd like to put to the controller?
My question to you, Gwyneth, as controller of Radio 4, is how much free rein you're happy to give the editor? And given that so many of us loyal listeners are unhappy with the present output, when are you going to pick up the phone to the editor and say, thus far and no further?
Oh, Ken, I'm sorry that you feel this way, but I'm so glad that you've listened for so long, because it's such a remarkable drama.
But it's changed its nature, this is what he's saying.
I don't agree. I think if you look back, there have always been extraordinary things going on in the Archers. I mean, kidnaps, arsons, all kinds of things. And I have enormous confidence in Sean O'Connor, who's no longer a new editor, and the undercurrent of this programme is without doubt still the everyday life in the country. It's very carefully researched. I know how passionately Sean feels about its grounding in the countryside. And, you know, it is a drama. Things have to happen from time to time.
But, Ken, do you think that things are happening too frequently, as it were? It's not what happens, but it's a number of times these rather extraordinary things happen.
Absolutely. You know, the sudden dropping in of the last Tony accident, you know, that just seemed to be so contrived to put up, as I say, a bit of drama and shock. And, you know, clearly from your postbag, it's not just me who feels this way. It is a feeling about the programme that's heading in a different direction.
Controller, you do actually have a pretty considerable amount of control over the Archers, don't you? There's a long-term planning meeting that takes place where
Indeed.
the major storylines are discussed. And if
Indeed.
you want to block something, you could.
Well, it's not a question of blocking. I mean, this is a...
No, but you could block it if you wanted to. You could say, as a previous controller did say, I understand, Helen Bowden, that murder will not take place.
Well, I have not been confronted by anything like that I felt needed substantial blocking. This is a conversation that takes place with the editor. The editor and his team are brilliant. He has a distinguished background, Sean, in theatre and drama. Honestly, the crushing of Tony by the bull is a very common thing in the countryside, tragically. This isn't a particularly unusual kind of accident. I think you should have confidence and stick with it. And I think, you know, you're in for quite a treat. Just stay with it. Please stay with it, Ken.
Ken, what's your message? To calm things down, is that it? More about the normal day-to-day things in the countryside, is that what you want?
It is. I can only describe this word as an uncomfortable direction of travel for the Archers storyline. You know, I don't really particularly turn on the Archers to be confronted with yet another emotional shock, and it's the yet another, I think, is the real issue here.
Well, what about Blithe Spirit, and are you looking forward to that? That's the usual Christmas general excitement on the Archers, all the turkey selling and the turkey plucking. I mean, there's plenty of normal Archers life going on, isn't there, Ken?
That is still happening, undoubtedly, but this feeling that one always has about the Archers, that there is going to be a good outcome to bad stories, I don't feel that comfortable anymore, that there's just not going to be another shock round the corner to up the drama.
Well, it has to be said, Ken Oliver's view, and thanks very much for it, Ken, is echoed by the vast majority of correspondents to Feedback, amongst them Lynn McPherson. Lynn, what's the point you want to make to the controller?
The Archers seems to have changed from an amiable programme, and now it's representing a completely dysfunctional village. I mean, people don't behave like this. I live in the country, and you say it's representing a country village. It isn't. Not any country village I know.
Well, it represents a country village, but it's also a drama. So, look, I do respect your listening for so long, and I'm so pleased that you do. I'd be very upset if you weren't enjoying it. Perhaps this is the sort of thing that's bound to happen from time to time in any drama, that there are phases where you prefer it and phases where you like it less, well.
Well, Lynn, I hope you'll bring us again or contact us again in February, when the editor of The Archers, Sean O'Connor, has agreed to come onto the programme to answer yours and other people's questions. That's when we return in February. In the meantime, please keep those comments coming. Well, another burning, occasionally scalding issue for this series has been the changes made to the schedule of Radio 4 at midday. Now, since August, the first 12 or so minutes of You and Yours have been replaced by a number of very different short programmes. Pen and paper at the ready? How many of these can you identify?
It didn't look good.
I know, Councillor.
It made us appear unprepared, disorganised, and worse, it made us appear unfeeling.
But the self-portraits of painters, mostly made after they spend hours staring sideways at their reflection in the mirror, are not like selfies.
Is rather hanging back and waiting to see how Dominic plays before embarking on a grand strategy.
She was a very, very good mother. I'm very often think, how would my mother do or say?
This week we're talking about what it means to be free. I'm joined by the lawyer, Harry Potter, the philosopher, Angie Hobbs.
Think things through. Look ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I am. Thanks to you. This time next week I could be in the army.
Well, how many did you get right? In order, we had World War I drama Homefront, 21st century mythologies across the board, Witness, A History of Ideas, and then a return to the home front, all of which have taken up a quarter of You and Yours' previous running time. Listeners' reactions have been mixed.
Hello, Feedback. My name's Caroline Waterstone. I live in Berkhamsted, Hertfordshire. There are many other slots to put a serial on the First World War, or many other slots to put chess. It's not that You and Yours is the best programme in the world. I just think that it's a slot that's not worth messing with.
Homefront, absolutely love it. What a brilliant tribute to those who lived through that time, whether fighting in appalling conditions or trying to make ends meet at home.
Hi, my name is Zoe Jenkins. I'm phoning from the Wirral on Merseyside. I've been trying to get my head around this academic thing they've put on. I'm quite a bright lady and I can't get my head around it at all, so I don't feel it's at all worth sacrificing the 15 minutes of You and Yours for.
Gwyneth Williams, drama, semiotics, chess, extended repeats of World Service interviews and philosophy. Is there a theme to this slot that I've missed, or is it just somewhere to put programmes you don't have room for elsewhere?
Not at all. The idea of this slot is to bring original and interesting new programming to the listener. And we're thrilled to have Homefront there, which I think is a terrific new drama. And then in the spaces between Homefront, we're going to bring you some new and interesting and I hope exciting, challenging features, 50-minute features. It's in no way a comment on You and Yours, which is still 45 minutes, which is the length of all our other programmes, news programmes, The World at One, The World Tonight, and it's a substantial daily presence on Radio 4.
But it can't be, as I understand it, Homefront will run for, as it were, the duration of the war. This would mean it would be at least 2018/19 before you could restore You and Yours 12 minutes if you decided to. So it's certainly for the next 4 years, this is the new length of You and Yours.
Well, I'm going to have another look at it next year and see how things are going. But at the moment, this is our plan. And I must say the audience so far, in the first, we've had very recent figures, has held up extremely well. It's more or less the same. And so I'm perfectly happy with the content. I mean, I think the chess series, for example, with Dominic Lawson interviewing the most extraordinary characters over the chessboard was really brilliant. And Melvin's ideas programme with Diatima's Ladder, you know, from lust to morality and the Platonic ideal of beauty. I think this is a wonderful way of giving people a glimpse into something for 15 minutes. You can download it, and we put it together at the end of the week into an hour. I think this is... I've been absolutely thrilled with the slot so far.
Listener Jeremy Marchand isn't a great fan of You and Yours, but, Jeremy, what is it about forced programming that worries you?
Well, my contention is that it's very hard to deliver a satisfying, useful programme at a quarter of an hour. Of course, I'm not saying it's not possible. Think of Letter from America, for example. But usually...
Oh, indeed, from our own correspondent.
Indeed. But usually you end up with something that's either trivial, if I may say so, including across the board, or incomplete, like a history of ideas, or without any context, like Peter Hennessy's interviews this week. And I argue that glimpses are simply not enough. And I think you underestimate the intelligence of the audience. So
let me put that directly to Gwyneth then. I mean, 15 minutes is too short for the complexity and seriousness of the ideas being discussed.
Well, heaven forfend that I should ever underestimate the complexity and the intelligence of the Radio 4 audience. I would never do that. I think Peter's series this week, Peter Hennessy talking about the future of the United Kingdom Constitution, is completely brilliant, and I'm thrilled to have it this week of all weeks. So you're hearing it debated on the Today programme, and then you go to Peter's measured series of 15-minute interviews and takes with people who really understand the Constitution, and goodness me, he is probably our greatest expert.
Yeah, but I think that, Jeremy wouldn't disagree with that. They've got the right people. You're just not giving them enough time. Jeremy, when you talk about the context missing, say in the Peter Hennessy series, which is running this week, what sort of things are missing in your view?
Well, actually, the sort of context which the controllers just mentioned, which is the Today context. I've not heard any of that, though. I'm only approaching a single interview, 15, 13 minutes, in itself. And that is just fine as it stands, but I don't have anything to relate it to, because I don't, unfortunately, listen to Radio 4 all the time.
Gwyneth?
Oh, well, I would suggest you listen to Radio 4 all the time.
Don't work, don't do anything else, don't go out in the garden.
No, I understand what you're saying, really, because, of course, I'm from a current affairs background myself, and, there's nothing I like more than getting stuck into an analysis or crossing continents. On the other hand, I do think that the 15 minutes is a really rather brilliant length to allow people to get some excitement and some understanding of things that are going on, particularly in our narrative history strand or in this new ideas strand. I think it's a way of just letting people have a taste of something. They can always follow it up later if they want more context and background. And I'm very keen that people who don't perhaps have half an hour to spare don't lose out on some of these things that we try and do on Radio 4.
Well, aside from Homefront, the series with the highest profile of those short-form programmes has been A History of Ideas, and that's been accompanied by animations. Now, Controller, you've recently said that Radio 4 needs to build a dazzling digital life for itself. Where does a series of short animations fit in that strategy?
The thing is that Radio 4, for people who listen all the time, they'll know this, that it is extraordinarily modern. Although we have a terrific history and tradition, it's a very modern proposition because it crosses borders and boundaries, geographically and in subject matter, and you get surprises, and people are thinking across subject areas. But
it's radio. Have you lost confidence in radio alone? Do you think people need animations to understand Radio 4?
Not at all. I think radio is a wonderful medium.
So what are you doing it for?
Because it adds. And I think that where we'll approach this very carefully editorially, when something adds in the digital world, we will provide it for listeners.
Well, if I may, listener Katie Hawkes is on the line. She has a number of questions. She'd like to ask you about the so-called visualisation of radio. Katie?
Yes, just because we have the means to produce visualisations or a dazzling digital life doesn't mean we automatically should. Is it something you're generally incorporating into Radio 4, or is it being added to specific programming with a real purpose?
It's absolutely adding to specific programming. So that's why we did the animations that went with the series that are going with the Ideas series. And if you look at the one on Hobbes, for example, I think it's a brilliant depiction in 90 seconds of the basic argument. And I think it's fun. It adds.
I can understand visualising or putting little added extras.
Yes.
You say, for example, the history of Germany, where you can look at things, or the nice little programme the other day on the Yorkshire Symphony Orchestra, where you could have had slides of old photographs with accompanying music. But why are you visualising intellectual subjects such as the history of ideas or the Rees lectures? You said there's a bit about Hobbes. Well, if your contributors aren't explaining Hobbes' ideas, then you've got the wrong contributors. And what am I going to benefit from seeing the face of the Rees lecturer?
Oh, I think you'd benefit hugely from, or at least I think you would enjoy the animations that accompany Hobbes. That's why I'm suggesting it. It's just a different way of looking at it.
But I am not by my computer, and I think many Radio 4 listeners won't be near a computer while animations are being talked about, which means they can only ever be added extras. They're not integral parts of the programme.
No, they're not. You can enjoy the programme as it stands, and I hope that you will. But also remember that not everybody will come to the programme and listen to it on Radio 4. Some people might bump into these animations elsewhere on the internet, and it might draw in some other listeners to Radio 4 content.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's go on and look at how you managed to do all these things with a decreasing amount of money. You have around £90 million to spend on Radio 4 programmes, and listener Des Moore has questions for you. Let's take them one by one. Des?
The first question is, how much has the Radio 4 budget been cut by in the past year?
Well, it's a very hard question for me to answer that, because the cuts that I've had to take on Radio 4 have taken place over a 5-year period, and there is a certain amount of thinking going on about them still, and we aren't quite there yet. Over the period of 5 years that I'm working on, Radio 4 will have been cut by far more than it's been cut before, and we're still being protected compared with other radio networks, but we've had to
take...
And
these cuts will go on. I mean,
yes, these cuts go on.
You're into year 3 now in the Australian piece, so you've got 2 more years where you know you're going to have to cut back further.
Well, yes, we've got 5 years of cuts, and we have been cut proportionately more than we've ever been cut before. And that's fair enough, really, because we've had to take our share of much wider BBC cuts. You know, Roger, how deep those have been since the flat licence fee settlement. So the approach I've taken is to cut back Radio 4 Extra quite strongly in order to protect originations on Radio 4.
Yeah, there are virtually no originations on 4 Extra now, are there?
Well, there are some, but it's a very
few.
small commissioning budget there now. It's focusing on its archive heart, which actually is the nature of the network. But that's what I've done.
Privately, there are a lot of people in Radio 4 who really downbeat. The cuts are hurting very badly.
Yes, I think that it's true that we have been cut, as I said, more than we have before, although we've been relatively protected.
Let me bring in Des here, because I think you wanted to know about some of those decisions.
Yeah, what has been the most difficult decision you've taken to reduce costs?
Well, I obviously hate cutting original programming because I value it so much. I guess the hardest thing has been to make sure that the Radio 4 balance of programming across our brilliant range has been roughly the same, in the sense that I've taken a small amount out of drama, a small amount out of comedy. I've cut some factual. I've tried to cut in the schedule in a way that won't affect the mix so much and listeners won't be so cognizant of. For instance, we've cut some features and I've put the kitchen cabinet on Saturday morning. So I've done it as delicately as I can in that way. But then also, of course, we have, I've cut my own team. We have now one factual commissioning editor instead of two. As you know, we share an arts commissioner with the World Service.
The new comedy commissioner is going to work 3 days out of 5. I don't know how that works, but
indeed,
she's part-time, or he's going to be part-time.
Indeed. These cuts are quite significant, but we've had to make them. And I feel confident that we can still give everybody the kind of Radio 4 they do and should expect. But, I'll be very glad if we aren't cut any further.
You do occasionally push the boat out. For example, one of the centrepieces of the schedule over Christmas is as we mentioned at the beginning, the 10-hour dramatisation of War and Peace on New Year's Day, starring John Hurt and Simon Russell Beale.
And Harriet Walter.
And the great Harriet Walter. Here's an exclusive sneak preview.
Tell them to form into battalions and go around the village. What we don't need is a narrow defile of soldiers.
When we are through the village, then I will form them into battalions, Your Excellency.
A fine sight if you line them up right in front of the enemy. A fine sight.
The enemy, Your Excellency, is 6 miles away, according to the disposition.
Not disposition! Do as you're ordered, now! And make sure the riflemen are at the front.
Really, at the front? So soon?
That's undoubtedly ambitious and costly. So how could you be cutting and afford to do that?
Well, I'm very careful with my money on Radio 4, and we look after the interests of the listener, which means that we absolutely cannot cut back on our ambition. And also, this War and Peace dramatisation is also going to be broadcast week after week in our normal schedule. So it isn't really costing very much more than a normal drama. So we just try and work the money as carefully as we can in the interests of the listener.
Now, apart from the money, of course, BBC Trust wanted to do a number of other things. And it keeps on saying to Radio 4, to controllers before you, but to you, you've got to do two things in particular. One is you've got to get younger listeners in there, the so-called replenishers. And the second thing is that you've got to try and get more people from outside the southeast to listen. And you've not succeeded, as far as I can see, on either of those two things, have you?
Well,
you haven't got a significantly younger audience for a start.
Well, I would disagree with you.
Well, its average age is 54, 55. It has been for a number of years.
And I think that's rather a triumph.
But it doesn't mean you've increased the number of younger listeners, does it?
What it means is that as people are living longer and our audience is getting older and older and older, we now have a steady quarter of Radio 4 listeners who are of the next generation age, if you like, and the average age is really much the same. I think we're doing as well as we could on that front. Of course, I'd always want more.
I know, but they said this. Look, Radio 4's weekly reach is higher amongst older audiences, those from better-off households, those living in London, and the South East and white audiences. And they've said to you pretty clearly, you've got to aim to increase the appeal among different demographic groups, and they mention in particular those from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Is there any sign that you're doing this?
Well, there is actually, in the sense that our audiences from the north and from Wales and from other parts of the country are going up a little. I wouldn't want to boast about it because it's not by a great deal, but they are going up a bit, and we have, I think, a great range of diverse and different voices across Radio 4, and I could give you plenty of examples of ethnic minority voices that we have, and really brilliant women.
Are you going to try to increase the proportion, the percentage of those voices?
I have done. I think if you look, you'll see Anita Anand presenting Any Answers.
And you'll continue to do so?
You'll see Asma... yes, I'll continue to do so when we have excellent people. I only want the best broadcasters, the most brilliant people to come to Radio 4.
Can we talk about the elephant in the room, in a sense, which is charter renewal and the licence fee? About 2 years away now, slightly more, not much more. After the next general election, it's going to be right in the focus. And there are a lot of people in our listeners who think that radio somehow is never mentioned in the big argument for public service broadcast. And the Director General's always talked about television. When are you going to champion radio? When are you going to get on the front foot and argue for it?
Well, Roger, our content speaks for itself.
Oh, well, it doesn't, does it? I mean, this is about politics. You're talking about a lot of politicians who don't listen or watch a great deal. So you have to get out to the opinion forms who often are too busy to listen
But Roger,
to those things they legislate about.
Yes, but if you'd followed, for example, the last couple of weeks on the Reith Lectures with Atul Gawande and seen the column inches and the editorials devoted to the programmes that we make on Radio 4, I think that this case is made. I agree with you. I would love it if people would make more noise about radio,
including the Director
and particularly
General.
Radio 4.
Including the Director General.
I think that Tony Hall is very aware of how important Radio 4 is, and he's a great fan. I know he listens to dramas. I send him some from time to time. I think, without doubt, a modern Radio 4, which is what we are, and a Radio 4 that can capture the imagination of the British public is going to be absolutely at the heart of the BBC charter renewal. I mean,
let's suppose it's a tough licence fee settlement, which I don't think it takes a lot of imagination. It will be. There's going to be a scrap inside the BBC for who gets what. Are you absolutely confident that Radio 4 will be able to function 5 years ahead of now where we are today, in a similar way as it is now?
Yes, I am, or I wouldn't still be in this job.
Thank you very much. Now, just before we go, a plea from listener Alex Scott Samuel.
Do please cover Jake Yapp's brilliant takeoff of a day's Radio 4 programming, which went out at the end of Sunday's Broadcasting House. It caught practically everything I want to whinge about on feedback.
OK, Alex, just for you.
Hello, and welcome to Feedback, the show that's all about you, although I'll do a little self-deprecatory joke at the top to remind you that really it's all about me.
Oh dear, very funny, Mr. Producer. All too accurate. That was Jake Yapp's take on Feedback, and terribly amusing it was too. Now please, play the correct bit.
Welcome to the Moral Maze with Jungle Mike. Is it time to bring back slavery? Or did it never go away? Yeah?
Shipping forecast issued at middle class bedtime hours GMT. Fisher, Dogger, Jim Jams, good. North at Sierra, South at Sierra, falling sleepy, soporific, good. German bite, warm milk, childhood throwback, eyelids falling steadily, 1, then 2. In my 40s, mummy, daddy, night-night darling, good.
That slightly updated version of Jake Yapp's Radio 4 in 4 minutes is now up on the official Radio 4 website. Gwyneth Williams, is that parody too close for comfort in terms of feedback it was?
No, we love it. We know that Radio 4 listeners really listen and they understand us and they can make fun of us, just as in your family, you know, they say the most brutal things about you. Well, that's the job. Thank you very much, listeners.
And they still love you. Gwyneth Williams, thank you very much. And that's it for this week. Indeed, for this year. We're back in February, when the editor of The Archers will be here to answer your Ambridge-related questions. By which time, let us pray that Helen has seen the light and David and Ruth have finally worked out why they have been offered so much money for their farm. Goodbye. Trella, is that what you will be drinking?
I certainly will. I'll be there with my blinnies and vodka.
But how long? I mean, 10 hours. Do you expect anybody to listen all the way through?
This is the most brilliant book ever written. It's not a conventional novel. People can dip in and out of it, and they will get an enormous amount from almost anything they hear of it.
Well, we'll be talking budgets and epic drama in more detail in a moment, but first there's no doubt which programme has dominated the feedback inbox over the past 12 weeks. The Archers. Listener Ken Oliver sent us that version of The Archers theme tune. Ken, does that sum up your view of the current direction of The Archers? It's morphing into EastEnders.
Absolutely, Roger. I've been a listener for 40 years or so, and of course we've seen many dramatic twists and turns in the plot over that time, but there just seems to be an urge under the new editor to shock us, and I think that music sums it all up, really.
And so what's the question you'd like to put to the controller?
My question to you, Gwyneth, as controller of Radio 4, is how much free rein you're happy to give the editor, and given that so many of us loyal listeners are unhappy with the present output, when are you going to pick up the phone to the editor and say, thus far and no further?
Oh, Ken, I'm sorry that you feel this way, but I'm so glad that you've listened for so long, because it's such a remarkable drama.
But it's changed its nature, this is what he's saying.
I don't agree. I think if you look back, there have always been extraordinary things going on in the Archers. I mean, kidnaps, arsons, all kinds of things. And I have enormous confidence in Sean O'Connor, who's no longer a new editor, and the undercurrent of this programme is without doubt still
This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. This week, in the last programme of the series, The Most Powerful Person in Radio 4, its boss, Gwyneth Williams, is in the feedback hot seat to take questions directly from listeners. Ambridge, the 12 o'clock schedule changes, and the allegedly dazzling digital future of Radio 4 will all get an airing, along with other issues you've raised with us in this series. And we'll be asking the controller whether the ongoing budget cuts mean epics like this will soon become a thing of the past.
Oh, the wound isn't on my face, it's here in my heart. Andre, my boy, stop them!
A tantalising taste of the 10-hour adaptation of War and Peace, which is taking up pretty much all of the schedule on New Year's Day, and which should be consumed with a glass of vodka, says the controller. No, but you could block it if you wanted to. You could say, as the previous controller did say, I understand, Helen Bowden, that murder will not take place.
Well, I have not been confronted by anything like that I felt needed substantial blocking. This is a conversation that takes place with the editor. The editor and his team are brilliant. He has a distinguished background, Sean, in theatre and drama. Honestly, the crushing of Tony by the bull is a very common thing in the countryside, tragically. This isn't a particularly unusual kind of accident. I think you should have confidence and stick with it. And I think, you're in for quite a treat. Just stay with it. Please stay with it, Ken.
Ken, what's your message? To calm things down, is that it? More about the normal day-to-day things in the countryside, is that what you want?
It is. I can only describe this word as...
Everyday life in the country. It's very carefully researched. I know how passionately Sean feels about its grounding in the countryside. And, it is a drama. Things have to happen from time to time.
But, Ken, do you think that things are happening too frequently, as it were? It's not what happens, but it's a number of times these rather extraordinary things happen.
Absolutely. The sudden dropping in of the last Tony accident, that just seemed to be so contrived to put up, as I say, a bit of drama and shock. And, clearly from your postbag, it's not just me who feels this way. It is a feeling about the programme that's heading in a different direction.
Controller, you do actually have a pretty considerable amount of control of the Archers, don't you? There's a long-term planning meeting that takes place where the major storylines are discussed. And if you want to block something, you could.
Well, it's not a question of blocking. I mean,